Hello everyone, my name is Molly Marsh and my PhD research is in the field of music performance anxiety, which I'll be referring to as MPA. The aim of my research is to identify the kind of education, training and support that I believe could help to mitigate MPA, and then to develop a psychoeducation programme for musicians. I'm currently in my third year of 6 as a part-time student, and my supervisors at the RNCM are Dr. Michelle Phillips and Dr. Jenny Henley. So just briefly, for those of you who didn't hear my presentation last year, this is the background context for my research. MPA is widespread and can have a serious impact on musicians' well-being. MPA often coexists with other anxiety disorders or depression. There is still some degree of stigma associated with MPA. Destructive beliefs can be detrimental to emotional well-being. Not knowing how to manage MPA symptoms is a major cause of anxiety for musicians. Musicians rarely seek professional help for psychological problems. And training offered by conservatoires is recent and still limited. Many professional musicians may have received little or no formal training about MPA during their studies. As a step towards identifying the kind of training and support that is needed, I carried out an online survey with professional and student musicians. My aim was to find out about their current levels of knowledge and understanding of MPA, and about their beliefs, their experiences, and their views regarding training. There was no existing validated questionnaire that was able to answer my research questions, so I had to develop my own. It consisted mainly of Likert scale items and closed answer questions, but also included general text boxes at the end of each section to give participants the opportunity to expand on any of their answers if they wished. Many people did choose to do this, resulting in some really interesting qualitative data to support the quantitative findings. The questionnaire was sent out to all 9 UK conservatoires, 6 of which decided to participate with varying degrees of support, and to the managers of UK orchestras. I received a total of 302 responses from 252 conservatoire students and 50 professional musicians. I'm currently in the process of analysing a large quantity of both quantitative and qualitative data, so I'm not yet in a position to present my final results, but I would like to offer a glimpse into this work in progress by sharing some key findings and discussing their implications for the next stage of my project. Most professional musicians feel that their training about MPA and about musicians' health and well-being was insufficient, and for some it was non-existent. Training for current students has improved, but many still consider it to be insufficient. Professional musicians report higher levels of knowledge than students, but own experience is the main source of their knowledge. 37% of respondents strongly agreed with the statement, "I sometimes experience a level of MPA that is detrimental to my well-being." And of those who experience a level of MPA that is detrimental to their well-being, 69% have not sought professional help. 92% of respondents feel they could benefit from further training about MPA, but diverse views exist about how best to deliver this training. So I'm going to expand a little on each of these findings in turn, and then offer some thoughts on what that means for the development of a psychoeducation programme. This bar chart shows professional musicians' responses to the statement, "I received sufficient education about music performance anxiety as part of my musical training." As you can see, the vast majority disagreed. One musician in her 50s wrote, "When I was studying, performance anxiety was never mentioned. It just was not acknowledged as something that a musician might suffer from." There were several similar comments from musicians aged 40 and above, with the only exceptions being where they had received good help from a specific instrumental teacher. The words stigma and taboo were both mentioned several times. It seems that this was starting to change a bit for musicians now in their 30s, but experiences were still very mixed and seemed to be mainly dependent on the approach of individual teachers. One musician in her 30s who had received group-based workshops as a student shared some detailed comments about her experiences, which unfortunately were not very positive. This was partly because the workshop leaders were not high-level performers themselves, which she felt negated much of what they had to say, as they hadn't lived the experience of high-pressure performing, and partly because, and I quote now, "Performance anxiety is an unpredictable thing and so highly individual that group workshops in the form I experienced were unhelpful." This obviously gave me some food for thought, seeing as I'm planning a group-based programme myself, and it's something I will come back to later on when I discuss the implication of these findings. Here we have the responses to the same statement by current students. I have a large amount of qualitative data relating to this, which I'm in the process of analysing, and I'm not yet ready to present those final results. But what I can say, as you can see from this chart, is that although things have definitely improved a great deal, experiences are still very mixed. Some students reported very positive training experiences and good psychological support, and others reported very bad ones. Some of this definitely has to do with differences between the different conservatoires and what they offer. Some of it is to do with the approach of individual instrumental teachers or vocal teachers. Some of it is to do with student choices. For example, a couple of people said that they had chosen a mindfulness module and found this extremely helpful, but that they wouldn't otherwise have received much information about MPA if they had not chosen this course. As I mentioned on the findings page, professional musicians report higher levels of knowledge than students, despite having received less training. However, when we look at the main source of their knowledge, this comes mostly from their own experience. And whilst most professional musicians reported having found coping strategies that worked for them, responses were much more mixed when they were asked about their wider knowledge of which strategies, treatments, or therapies might be helpful for different manifestations of NPA, or whether they would know how to advise a student or colleague who was suffering from NPA. Another indication that knowledge about NPA is fairly limited comes from the reasons given for not seeking professional help. I had made a list of all the possible reasons that I thought might contribute to this, and respondents could select as many reasons as they wished from that list, or could add any other reasons of their own. What is really striking here is that not knowing what kind of help to choose is by far the most commonly given reason, selected by 65% of these respondents. The fact that over a quarter of this group would feel embarrassed or ashamed to admit to needing help is also a really important finding, as it suggests that even if attitudes have shifted considerably in recent years, we still have a long way to go in breaking down the stigma associated with NPA. The 6 respondents who selected other gave the following reasons: wanting to work at NPA in their own way, currently trying to implement suggestions from a tutor, finding it difficult to talk about their anxiety, and wanting to avoid medication. And on the subject of medication, I was quite surprised to find that the use of beta blockers by students was minimal. Only 8% of student respondents had used beta blockers. In contrast, 38% of the professional musicians had used beta blockers, which is very much in line with other existing beta blocker research. As shown by these 2 bar charts, almost all the respondents thought that courses about NPA should be offered as part of a musician's conservatoire training, but they were very divided in their opinions about whether courses should be compulsory or optional. So here are some of the reasons that were given for making courses compulsory. It gets rid of any stigma associated with attending, and if optional, those who need it the most may be the least likely to attend. On that point, several people specifically said that they would not attend an optional course because they would be embarrassed to attend or because they don't like admitting to suffering from MPA. So yes, it was suggested that making it compulsory would normalise it. It would be just another course that they had to attend. Some people felt that attending this course would provide useful skills for the future, in the sense that MPA can affect musicians at any time during their lives, so that even if they're not currently suffering, students might find it helpful at some point to know about this. Another point was that many current students will one day be teachers, and knowledge will be needed in order to help their own students. And then this idea that everyone needs to understand MPA in order to help with empathy towards those who do suffer. On the other hand, there were some very compelling reasons for making the courses optional. Well, firstly, people felt that choice is always good and people should be allowed to decide for themselves. Some students may not need it. People who suffer from anxiety could find the talks or discussions about MPA triggering. And connected to that, learning about MPA might make people more aware of symptoms, like Googling health symptoms. And one person did say that after attending a lecture about MPA, she found herself experiencing symptoms that she hadn't really been aware of before. So that's clearly something to be very careful of. And as a final point, one that was made by quite a few people, if attendance is compulsory, it would not feel like a safe space to discuss anxiety. So we have some quite interesting things going on there. And the question is, how do we draw all this together? These very diverse views lead on to another important consideration about how information about MPA should be delivered. So 92% of respondents felt they could benefit from further training about MPA, but 44 of these respondents said they would attend a talk but not a participatory workshop. One person wrote that showing weakness in front of colleagues in a participatory workshop could be used against one in the future. And looking at how this subgroup responded to other items on the questionnaire, it seems that many of them do suffer from MPA and were less likely than other respondents to discuss it with their teachers. So I do think there's a risk, therefore, that by making MPA training participatory, it may be avoided by some of the people who need it the most. On the other hand, 7 people said they would attend a participatory workshop but not a talk. One person gave an extended explanation for this choice, which I felt would be worth sharing. I quote, "Conservatoire students are frequently unwilling to talk about MPA, either because we are afraid, ashamed, or worried that it will never go away. I believe that the longer the issue remains unspoken, the worse it becomes. I struggled through the issue for years with my private music teacher, with little to no improvement. It was only when I began attending workshops with small groups of participants and MPA professionals that I felt I had control of the issue. For me, bringing the issue into light within a trusted group of colleagues and peers, led by a professional, was when I began to develop positive coping techniques." So, what does this all mean for my psychoeducation programme? Firstly, that it's extremely complicated, that different people have different needs and different wishes, and that there is absolutely not a one-size-fits-all solution. I'm also very aware that this is a highly sensitive and personal subject that needs handling with great care. So one thing I'm currently considering is a programme consisting of various different stages, with the idea being that participants would be able to opt in and out according to their needs. This might work, for example, by offering all participants an introductory talk, followed by more in-depth talks about specific subjects for those who want them. I would then like to be able to offer one-to-one consultations to discuss individual needs and make personalised plans. And finally, to offer participatory workshops in small groups, which are entirely optional. And my hope would be that if the earlier part of the course has been successful in reducing stigma and in replacing destructive beliefs with more positive ones, then most people might choose to opt in. This more personalised approach will also involve some changes to my research methods, and I'm definitely moving now towards a more qualitative approach in which the participants are much more involved in the research process. So that's all I have time for today. And I'm looking forward to updating you next year on how all this develops. And I'm also looking forward to receiving your questions. Thank you for listening.